The cargo pilot's secret. Elena Martinez had always been underestimated. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall with her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked more like a schoolteacher than someone who could handle a massive cargo plane. The other pilots at Henderson Air Base would nod politely when she walked by, but their conversations would continue as if she wasn't there. They saw her uniform with the cargo division patches and assumed she spent her days hauling supplies and equipment across safe routes. What they didn't know was that Elena had been flying combat missions in secret for the past 18 months. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Elena arrived at the base before dawn, her thermos of coffee steaming in the cool air. She walked past the fighter jets lined up on the tarmac, their sleek forms barely visible in the early morning darkness. The pilots who flew those machines were the heroes everyone talked about. They got the medals, the newspaper interviews, and the respect of their peers. Elena's plane sat in a different section of the base. The C-130 Hercules was a beast of an aircraft, built for carrying heavy loads rather than engaging in aerial combat. Its 4 turboprop engines and boxy design made it look clumsy next to the nimble fighter jets. To everyone watching, it was just another cargo plane preparing for another routine supply run. But appearances could be deceiving. Captain Rodriguez, Elena's commanding officer, met her at the aircraft as she completed her pre-flight inspection. He was one of only 3 people on the entire base who knew the truth about her missions. The secrecy wasn't just military protocol, it was a matter of survival. "The packages are loaded," Rodriguez said quietly, using their code word for the specialized equipment hidden in the cargo hold. "Your flight plan shows a supply run to forward operating base Delta, but you know where you're really going?" Elena nodded. For the past year and a half, she had been flying deep into enemy territory under the cover of routine cargo missions. Her plane had been secretly modified with advanced radar systems, defensive countermeasures, and, most importantly, a hidden weapons bay that could deploy air-to-air missiles. The enemy had been tracking cargo flights, but they considered them low-priority targets. It was the perfect cover for what Elena was really doing. The real mission had started when intelligence discovered that enemy forces were using a network of hidden airfields to launch surprise attacks. Traditional fighter patrols couldn't locate these bases because the enemy had learned to avoid areas where combat aircraft were expected. But cargo planes? They flew everywhere, and no one paid them much attention. Elena climbed into the cockpit and began her start-up procedures. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, was the only other person who knew the truth about their flights. Sarah had volunteered for the program after losing her brother in one of the enemy's surprise attacks. "Radio check," Elena said into her headset as they prepared for takeoff. Loud and clear came the response from the control tower. "Cargo 77, you're cleared for departure. Have a safe flight." If only they knew, Elena thought as she guided the heavy aircraft down the runway. The C-130 lifted off with its usual lack of grace, climbing steadily into the morning sky. To anyone watching from the ground, it looked like just another routine cargo flight. But 20 minutes into the flight, Elena made a subtle course correction that took them away from the official flight plan. They were now heading toward a region where satellite intelligence had detected unusual activity. 3 enemy airfields had been identified in the area, but ground forces couldn't reach them, and sending fighter jets would alert the enemy to abandon the bases before they could be destroyed. Elena's job was to find these hidden airfields and eliminate any aircraft that tried to take off from them. Her modified cargo plane was equipped with long-range sensors that could detect enemy aircraft from much farther away than traditional radar. Once she located her targets, she could engage them before they even knew she was there. "Contact," Sarah said, studying the radar display. 3 aircraft taking off from coordinates Delta 7. Elena felt her heart rate increase, but her hands remained steady on the controls. This was what she had trained for. The enemy pilots would see a cargo plane on their radar and assume it was harmless. They would never expect what was about to happen. Switching to combat systems, Elena announced. The cargo hold of her plane opened, revealing missile launchers that had been hidden beneath fake supply crates. The transformation took less than 30 seconds, but it changed everything about the aircraft's capabilities. The enemy fighters were climbing toward them now, probably planning to intercept what they thought was a lost cargo plane. Elena could imagine their confusion as they approached. They might even be planning to escort her back to their airfield as a prize. They were about to get the surprise of their lives. Elena's first target was climbing directly toward them, apparently curious about the cargo plane that had wandered into their airspace. The pilot was probably radioing his base, reporting that they had captured an enemy supply aircraft. Elena waited until the fighter was close enough to ensure a clean shot, then triggered her first missile. The enemy pilot had no time to react. His aircraft exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the morning sky. Elena was already locking onto her second target before the debris from the first plane had finished falling. The second enemy fighter tried to turn away, but Elena's missiles were faster than anything they had expected to face from a cargo plane. Within moments, 2 enemy aircraft had been destroyed, and the third was desperately radioing for backup. Elena smiled grimly as she turned toward the hidden airfield where the fighters had originated. Her mission was just beginning. The enemy base appeared on her radar as a cluster of buildings hidden among the hills. Elena could see aircraft on the ground, and she knew that more fighters would be taking off soon to investigate the destruction of their patrol. She needed to act quickly before they could scramble their entire squadron. Sarah worked the weapons systems while Elena positioned the aircraft for their attack run. The hidden airfield had no idea what was coming. To them, the approaching aircraft still looked like a harmless cargo plane on their radar. Elena's third missile found its target as an enemy fighter was taxiing for takeoff. The explosion triggered a chain reaction as fuel from the destroyed aircraft ignited other planes nearby. Within minutes, the hidden airfield was in chaos, with secondary explosions lighting up the landscape. But Elena's celebration was short-lived. Her radar was showing new contacts approaching from the east, more enemy fighters responding to the distress calls from the base. These pilots would be expecting trouble, and Elena's element of surprise was gone. 6 contacts incoming, Sarah reported, her voice tense. They're moving fast. Elena knew that her cargo plane, despite its hidden weapons, was still no match for 6 enemy fighters in a traditional dogfight. She needed to use her advantages, surprise, deception, and the enemy's continued underestimation of what she was capable of. She turned her plane toward the approaching fighters, maintaining the steady flight pattern of a cargo aircraft. To the enemy pilots, she would still appear to be a harmless transport plane, possibly damaged and trying to escape the area. As the first enemy fighter close to within firing range, Elena made her move. Her 5th missile streaked across the sky, destroying the lead aircraft before its pilot could react. The remaining enemy pilots suddenly realized they weren't facing a helpless cargo plane. But by then, it was too late. Elena had positioned herself perfectly for the engagement, and her hidden weapons systems gave her capabilities that the enemy had never encountered before. Her 6th missile found its target as the enemy formation scattered in confusion. The remaining 4 enemy pilots were now fully aware that they were fighting something far more dangerous than they had expected, but Elena's unconventional tactics continued to give her the advantage. Using the cargo plane's ability to change direction quickly despite its size, she managed to position herself for kill shots on 2 more enemy aircraft. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, only 2 enemy fighters remained. They were trying to coordinate an attack on Elena's plane, but Sarah's radar work and Elena's flying skills kept them from getting a clean shot. Elena's 8th and final missile of the mission found its target just as the enemy pilot thought he had a firing solution on the mysterious cargo plane. The last enemy fighter, apparently realizing that discretion was the better part of valor, turned and fled toward the horizon. Elena and Sarah looked at each other in amazement. They had just shot down 8 enemy aircraft in a single mission, using a cargo plane that everyone assumed was harmless. The hidden airfield below them was in ruins, and an entire enemy squadron had been eliminated. But, as they turned toward home, Elena knew that their secret wouldn't last much longer. Word would spread about the cargo plane that fought like a fighter jet. The enemy would start paying attention to aircraft they had previously ignored. Their advantage was diminishing with every successful mission. "Control, this is Cargo 77, Elena said into her radio as they approached Henderson Air Base. "Requesting clearance to land." Roger, Cargo 77. How was your supply run? Elena looked at the empty missile racks in her cargo hold, then, at the rising smoke from the destroyed enemy base visible in the distance. Routine flight, control. Nothing to report. As they touched down on the familiar runway, Elena knew that everything was about to change. Their success had been too dramatic to hide, and soon the whole world would know about the cargo pilot who had been secretly fighting the war from the shadows. The secret revealed 3 days after Elena's 8-kill mission, everything changed. She was sitting in the base cafeteria, quietly eating her lunch as usual, when Colonel Harrison approached her table. The base commander rarely spoke to cargo pilots, and Elena felt her stomach tighten as she saw the serious expression on his face. Captain Martinez, I need to see you in my office immediately, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet cafeteria. Every pilot in the room turned to stare as Elena stood up, their curiosity evident on their faces. Elena followed Colonel Harrison through the corridors of the administrative building, her mind racing. Had someone discovered the truth about her missions? Were her secret flights about to be exposed? She had known this day would come eventually, but she had hoped for a little more time. The colonel's office was filled with people Elena didn't recognize. Men and women in expensive suits sat around the conference table, their faces serious and their posture suggesting they were important government officials. Elena noticed several high-ranking military officers she had seen only in photographs, including General Morrison, who commanded the entire theater of operations. Captain Martinez, Colonel Harrison said as he closed the door behind them, I'd like you to meet some people who are very interested in your recent activities. Elena remained silent, unsure of how much these people knew and what she was supposed to say. The classified nature of her missions meant she couldn't discuss them with unauthorized personnel, but the presence of General Morrison suggested this was an official inquiry. One of the civilians, a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Captain, we know about the modified C-130. We know about your secret missions. And we know about what happened 3 days ago when you engaged 8 enemy fighters and won. Elena felt her world shifting. The secret she had carried for 18 months was out in the open, at least among these officials. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to discuss classified operations without proper clearance verification. General Morrison smiled for the first time since Elena had entered the room. Captain, everyone in this room has clearance levels that would make your head spin. We're not here to interrogate you. We're here to offer you something. The woman with gray hair opened a thick folder and placed several photographs on the table in front of Elena. The images showed the destroyed enemy airfield from 3 days ago, with detailed analysis of the damage and wreckage. Other photos showed Elena's C-130 in flight, apparently taken by satellites or surveillance aircraft. Your mission was more successful than you realize, the woman said. The airfield you destroyed was the primary staging area for enemy operations in this entire region. The aircraft you shot down included 3 of their most experienced pilots, including squadron leader Viktor Petrov, who had 37 kills to his credit. Elena studied the photographs, seeing her handiwork from a different perspective. The destroyed aircraft on the ground looked like toys from the satellite images, but she knew each one had represented a significant threat to her own forces. The enemy has been trying to figure out what happened, General Morrison continued. Their intelligence reports describe an impossible scenario where a cargo plane outfought an entire fighter squadron. They don't believe their own pilots' accounts of what they saw. Another official, a man in a Navy uniform, placed additional documents on the table. Captain, your success has created an opportunity. The enemy's confusion about your capabilities has made them paranoid about every cargo flight in the theater. They're now diverting significant resources to investigate supply aircraft instead of focusing on our actual combat operations. Elena began to understand why she was here. Her secret mission had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but now the military wanted to expand the program. They weren't here to shut down her operation, they wanted to make it bigger. The woman with gray hair confirmed Elena's suspicions. We want to offer you command of a new squadron. 12 aircraft, all modified like yours, with crews trained in your tactics. You'll have official authorization to engage enemy forces, but you'll still maintain the appearance of routine cargo operations. Elena felt overwhelmed. For 18 months, she had been fighting alone, carrying out missions that officially didn't exist. Now they wanted her to lead an entire squadron doing the same thing, but on a scale that would make concealment much more difficult. Ma'am, with respect, 12 aircraft conducting combat operations will be impossible to hide. The enemy will figure out what we're doing. General Morrison nodded. That's exactly what we're counting on, Captain. We want the enemy to know that cargo planes might be dangerous, but we want them to remain uncertain about which ones. Every supply flight will become a potential threat in their minds, forcing them to respond to aircraft they would normally ignore. The strategic implications were brilliant, Elena realized. If the enemy had to treat every cargo plane as a potential combat threat, their air defense systems would be overwhelmed. They would waste resources investigating harmless supply flights while real threats slipped through their defenses. But Elena also understood the personal cost of accepting this command. Her secret war would become a very public responsibility, with all the pressure and scrutiny that came with official recognition. She would no longer be the unknown pilot fighting from the shadows. There's something else, the woman said, sliding another document across the table. Your story has already started to leak. Military journalists have been investigating unusual aircraft losses in this region, and they're asking questions about mysterious cargo flights. We estimate you have maybe 2 weeks before someone publishes a story about the secret cargo pilot who's been shooting down enemy fighters. Elena felt a chill. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for how quickly her anonymity was disappearing. Once her story became public, everything would change. She would become a symbol, a propaganda tool, and a target for enemy intelligence. If you accept this command, General Morrison continued, we can control the narrative. Your story becomes about American ingenuity and the courage of our pilots, rather than about military deception and secret operations. You become a hero instead of a spy. The choice before Elena was clear but difficult. She could decline the promotion and probably be reassigned to actual cargo duties, watching from the sidelines as other pilots took over her mission. Or she could accept command of the new squadron and become the public face of an operation that would change how aerial warfare was conducted. Elena looked around the room at the faces of the officials waiting for her answer. These people had the power to make or break military careers, but they were asking rather than ordering. They needed her expertise and experience to make their expanded program work. What about my co-pilot, Lieutenant Chun? Elena asked. She's been with me on every mission. She knows the tactics and procedures better than anyone. Lieutenant Chen has been promoted to captain and will serve as your executive officer, the Navy officer replied. She'll help train the new crews and develop operational procedures for the squadron. Elena realized that her partnership with Sarah would continue, but their dynamic would change completely. Instead of 2 pilots sharing the risks of secret missions, they would become commanders responsible for dozens of aircrew members and millions of dollars in equipment. The woman with gray hair placed one final document on the table. Captain, I should mention that your promotion to major has been approved, along with several commendations for your previous missions. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with Valor device, and the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during your 4th mission. Elena touched her shoulder unconsciously, remembering the shrapnel wound from enemy fire that she had hidden from the base medical staff. Even her injuries had been classified, treated secretly by the small medical team that supported her covert operations. Ma'am, I never reported any injuries from that mission. We know, Major. We also know you completed 2 more missions before seeking medical attention. That kind of dedication is exactly why we want you to lead this squadron. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where her C-130 was parked among the other cargo aircraft. It still looked harmless and unremarkable, but she knew that would change soon. The new squadron's aircraft would probably be stationed separately, with obvious modifications that would make their combat role apparent to anyone who looked carefully. Her war in the shadows was ending, but a new kind of conflict was about to begin. Instead of fighting alone with the advantage of complete surprise, she would lead a squadron that the enemy knew to watch for. The tactical challenge would be entirely different, requiring new strategies and accepting higher risks. But Elena also realized that her success had proven something important. The assumptions that had led people to underestimate her, that cargo pilots weren't real warriors, that transport aircraft couldn't be effective in combat, that unconventional tactics had no place in modern warfare, had all been wrong. "I'll need complete authority over pilot selection and training," Elena said, turning back to face the officials. "And I want to choose the aircraft modifications personally. The enemy will adapt their tactics once they understand what we're doing, so our equipment and procedures need to stay ahead of their countermeasures." General Morrison smiled broadly. "I was hoping you'd say that, Major Martinez. Your first assignment is to design the training program for your new squadron. You'll have access to any resources you need, including the classified research on advanced aircraft modifications." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 2 weeks, her story would probably be on the front page of newspapers around the world. She would become the face of a new kind of warfare, inspiring some people and making herself a target for enemy intelligence services. But she had already crossed the point of no return 18 months ago when she first climbed into a modified cargo plane and flew toward enemy territory. Everything since then had been leading to this moment. "When do I meet my new squadron?" Elena asked. The woman with gray hair checked her watch. "They're waiting for you in Hangar 7, Major. 12 crews, all volunteers, all eager to learn from the pilot who shot down 8 enemy fighters in a single mission." Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her quiet war was about to become very loud indeed. But perhaps that was exactly what the situation required. Sometimes the best way to maintain an advantage was to use it so dramatically that the enemy never recovered from their surprise. As she left Colonel Harrison's office and walked toward Hangar 7, Elena could already hear the sound of aircraft engines warming up. Her new war was about to begin. The squadron's first battle. 2 months after accepting command of the new squadron, Major Elena Martinez stood in front of 12 modified C-130 aircraft that no longer looked anything like ordinary cargo planes. The secret was out completely now, and the enemy knew exactly what they were facing. The challenge had become something entirely different from Elena's original covert missions. The squadron had been officially designated as the 442nd Tactical Transport Wing, but everyone called them the Ghost Cargo Unit. Each aircraft had been extensively modified with advanced radar systems, electronic warfare equipment, and external weapon pylons that made their combat role obvious to anyone who saw them. The element of surprise was gone, but Elena had developed new tactics that turned their exposed status into an advantage. Captain Sarah Chen approached Elena as she completed her pre-flight inspection of the lead aircraft. Sarah's promotion to squadron executive officer had proven wise. She understood Elena's unconventional thinking and had helped train the new crews in tactics that no military academy had ever taught. "Intelligence reports that the enemy has established a new air base about 200 miles northeast of here," Sarah said, holding a tablet with satellite photos. "They've been using it to launch attacks on our forward positions, but it's too well defended for conventional airstrikes." Elena studied the images, noting the surface-to-air missile sites and the squadron of enemy fighters based at the facility. This was exactly the kind of target that had originally been assigned to her secret missions, but now she had 12 aircraft and 24 crew members under her command. The stakes were much higher. "What makes this different from the targets we hit during training?" Elena asked. "The enemy knows we're coming," Sarah replied. "They've modified their tactics specifically to counter cargo-based fighters. They're using swarm attacks with multiple fighters approaching from different directions, trying to overwhelm our defensive systems." Elena nodded grimly. The enemy had adapted faster than anyone had expected. After her story became public 3 weeks ago, enemy intelligence services had apparently worked around the clock to develop countermeasures for the Ghost Cargo Squadron. They now knew that cargo planes could be dangerous, and they were prepared to treat them as serious threats. "Have they figured out our new formation tactics?" Elena asked. Sarah smiled. "Intelligence says they're still confused about how we coordinate attacks between multiple aircraft. They keep expecting us to behave like conventional fighter squadrons. that was the key to Elena's new tactical approach. Instead of trying to make cargo planes fight like fighters, she had developed strategies that used their unique capabilities as transport aircraft. The Ghost Cargo Squadron could carry much larger loads than fighters, stay in the air longer, and operate from rough airfields that would be impossible for conventional combat aircraft. Elena had also realized that cargo planes could coordinate with each other in ways that fighter jets couldn't. While fighters operated as individual units that occasionally worked together, cargo aircraft were designed to function as part of larger logistical systems. Elena's squadron used this to their advantage, operating as a single distributed weapon system rather than 12 separate aircraft. "Brief the crews," Elena ordered. "We launch in 30 minutes. The mission briefing took place in Hangar 7, where Elena's original secret aircraft was now displayed as a museum piece. The 12 crews gathered around a large display screen showing satellite images of their target. Each crew consisted of a pilot, co-pilot, and weapons systems operator, making the squadron a 36-person unit that had become the most unusual combat formation in military history. "Today's mission will test everything we've learned about distributed warfare," Elena announced as she pointed to the enemy airbase on the screen. "The enemy expects us to approach as a single formation that they can engage with coordinated fighter attacks. Instead, we're going to arrive from 12 different directions over a period of 6 hours." The tactical plan was complex but elegant. Each Ghost cargo aircraft would approach the target along a different route, arriving at carefully coordinated times that would prevent the enemy from massing their defenses against any single threat. The cargo plane's long range and endurance made this possible in a way that would be impossible for conventional fighters. "Red Flight will engage the outer defenses beginning at 0800 hours, Elena continued. "Blue Flight will attack the airbase facilities at 0830. "Green Flight will intercept any enemy fighters that attempt to take off. The timing is critical. If anyone arrives early or late, the entire plan falls apart." Lieutenant Commander Jackson, pilot of Ghost Cargo 3, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what happens if the enemy launches fighters before we arrive? Our individual aircraft are still vulnerable to swarm attacks." Elena had anticipated this question. "Each aircraft has been equipped with long-range communications gear that allows us to coordinate defensive actions even when separated by hundreds of miles. If any Ghost cargo aircraft comes under attack, the entire squadron can provide support through electronic warfare systems and long-range missile strikes." This was the revolutionary aspect of Elena's new tactics. Traditional air combat assumed that aircraft needed to be in visual range to coordinate effectively, but modern technology made it possible for the Ghost Cargo Squadron to fight as a single unit even when spread across thousands of square miles. The mission launch went exactly as planned. 12 modified cargo aircraft took off from Henderson Air Base at 5-minute intervals, each heading toward a different initial waypoint that would bring them to the target area along carefully planned routes. Elena's aircraft was the last to depart, carrying the electronic warfare systems that would coordinate the entire attack. As Elena's plane climbed to cruising altitude, she could see the contrails from the other Ghost cargo aircraft spreading across the sky in different directions. To enemy observers monitoring the base, it would look like the squadron was scattering randomly instead of executing a coordinated battle plan. The first phase of the attack began exactly on schedule. Ghost Cargo 7, piloted by Captain Williams, approached the enemy airbase from the south and engaged the outer ring of surface-to-air missile sites. The cargo plane's electronic warfare systems jammed the missile guidance radars while its long-range weapons destroyed 3 SAM sites in quick succession. Elena monitored the attack through her aircraft's communication systems, watching as data from all 12 Ghost cargo planes created a complete picture of the battlefield. The enemy was responding exactly as predicted, launching fighters to intercept what they thought was a single attacking aircraft. But Ghost Cargo 7 was already departing the area by the time enemy fighters arrived at its last known position. The cargo plane's speed and range allowed it to strike and withdraw before the enemy could mount an effective response. Meanwhile, Ghost Cargo 4 was beginning its own attack run from the opposite direction. "Enemy fighters are airborne," Sarah reported from her position at the weapons control station. 12 aircraft taking off from the main runway. Elena smiled. The enemy was reacting to the Ghost cargo attacks, but they were still thinking in terms of conventional air combat. They were launching fighters to engage individual cargo planes, not realizing that they were facing a distributed weapon system that could strike from multiple directions simultaneously. "Execute blue flight attack," Elena ordered. 3 Ghost cargo aircraft approached the enemy airbase from different compass points, their attack's time to begin at exactly the same moment. The enemy fighters found themselves trying to respond to threats coming from the north, east, and west simultaneously. Their formation scattered as they tried to engage multiple targets. This was exactly what Elena had hoped for. Enemy fighters were most dangerous when they could concentrate their attacks on a single target, but the Ghost cargo squadron's distributed tactics prevented this concentration. Each cargo plane faced only a few enemy fighters instead of the entire enemy squadron. Ghost Cargo 9, piloted by Captain Rodriguez, engaged 2 enemy fighters that had turned toward his aircraft. The cargo plane's defensive systems and long-range missiles gave it advantages that the enemy pilots hadn't expected. Within minutes, both enemy fighters had been destroyed. Similar engagements were taking place across the battlefield as other Ghost cargo aircraft encountered small groups of enemy fighters. The cargo plane's superior electronics and coordination allowed them to engage and destroy enemy aircraft before the fighters could organize effective counterattacks. "Enemy airbase is neutralized," Sarah reported as the last phase of the attack concluded. "All targets destroyed, minimal damage to our aircraft." Elena checked the mission status display, which showed that 9 enemy fighters had been destroyed and the airbase's facilities were burning. The Ghost cargo squadron had lost no aircraft and suffered only minor damage from enemy fire. But the real success was strategic rather than tactical. The enemy had responded to the Ghost cargo attack using conventional fighter tactics that proved completely ineffective against distributed warfare. Their pilots and commanders were still thinking about air combat in terms of formations and group tactics that dated back to World War II. "Set course for home," Elena ordered. All aircraft maintained distributed return routes. As the Ghost cargo squadron returned to Henderson Air Base using 12 different flight paths, Elena reflected on how completely warfare had changed since her first secret mission 18 months ago. The cargo plane that everyone had assumed was harmless had become the foundation for an entirely new approach to air combat. The success of today's mission would probably lead to demands for more Ghost cargo squadrons, Elena realized. The military bureaucracy would want to expand the program and create doctrine for distributed warfare using modified transport aircraft. Her small squadron would become the prototype for a new branch of military aviation. But Elena also knew that the enemy would continue to adapt. Today's tactics had worked because the enemy was unprepared for distributed attacks, but they would learn from this defeat. Future missions would face countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize the Ghost cargo squadron's advantages. The war of adaptation between cargo-based fighters and conventional air defenses was just beginning. Elena's 8 victories in her original secret mission had started something that would change military aviation forever, but the final outcome was still uncertain. As Elena's aircraft approached Henderson Air Base, she could see news crews and reporters gathering near the flight line. Her story had captured public attention in a way that surprised everyone, and the Ghost cargo squadron's first official mission would be front-page news around the world. Elena had started her career as an underestimated cargo pilot flying secret missions that officially didn't exist. Now she was commanding a squadron that represented the future of air combat, proving that innovation and unconventional thinking could overcome any tactical disadvantage. The cargo pilot who had been invisible for 18 months was about to land at the center of international attention. But Elena knew that the real measure of her success wouldn't be media coverage or public recognition. It would be whether her revolutionary tactics could continue to protect the people who depended on her squadron's missions. As Ghost Cargo 1 touched down on the familiar runway, Elena was already planning modifications for their next mission. The war was far from over, and the enemy would be working to counter everything the squadron had accomplished today. But, for now, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The woman they had thought was just flying cargo had proven that the most dangerous weapons often came in the most unexpected packages.